Alright, so first off, if you didn't check out my tournament recap video earlier this week, that's totally fine. I'm going to be pulling a lot of numbers from there, though. It's only a couple minutes long if you do want to check it out first. If not, that's fine. It'll be pretty easy to follow along. But if you're wondering where I'm getting all of these numbers and statistics from, it's covered in that video. So it's fine if you just take me at my word instead. So Bannerman was the most popular top cut deck of the weekend, taking up 70% of the top cut, with the others being rounded out by MF Scouts and a couple of offshoot Demacia decks. But the thing that stuck out to me a lot was Unyielding Spirit, even though there are other reasons that this deck is very good. And the Unyielding Spirits that we saw weren't just a random one of, and they showed up in half the decks. So most people were playing 2 and a couple people were playing 3. Now the reason I'm bringing this to you is because while you do generally get to see your opponent's deck lists, most tournaments are open deck list, if you haven't put answers to Unyielding Spirit from your region into your deck, it's not going to do you any good to know that your opponent is running Unyielding Spirit other than having your finger on the escape button so you can surrender more quickly. Now, Purify is not an answer to Unyielding Spirit 9 times out of 10, as it is generally going to be going on to Fiora or Garen, who cannot be purified, and that's because these champions just synergize so well with not being able to die. Garen gets to upgrade very easily, you get to take pretty much infinite combat phases, the Fiora can just win the game if given the opportunity and unable to die, so it's no surprise that Unyielding Spirit is being played in these Demacia decks, and I definitely think we're going to see it take up a bit more of a percentage on the upcoming weekend. And a big part of that is Unyielding Spirit is just hard to answer. Purify and She Who Wanders don't really get it done since this is generally going down onto champions. Devourer of the Depths can be a little inconsistent as forms of removal. And then all of the bounce effects we see out of Ionia are good and the most effective way of dealing with this, but we've seen Ionia fall off, and I don't think it's worth including in your lineup just to deal with Unyielding Spirit Bannerman decks when you can just ban them and not feel too bad about that. Bannerman decks are very strong and very mainstay in the meta for a reason, and I don't think anyone's going to fault you if you come in with a general strategy of banning Bannerman, especially if Unyielding Spirit's going to be in there. What I do think that you should do is reconsider your lineup if you are trying to pick on the Bannerman decks. If you want to run Karina control and then other decks like Karina, just board wipe the Demacia decks, stall them out, maybe an Ash deck or something along those lines, just reconsider because the Unyielding Spirit can blow that strategy wide open. Endure Spiders was another very popular deck this weekend. Nowhere near as popular as Bannerman, but probably the second most popular deck across all the tournament top cuts. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, They Who Endure is also hard to answer, much like Unyielding Spirit. Purify opens up as an option, but that's something we've seen as kind of fluctuating among the Demacia lists. It's not always included in there. And the Endure Atrocity combo can win the game around Unyielding Spirit, which is one of the very few things that can do that. Your options are pretty much Endure Atrocity and Ezreal if you're trying to just leave this Unyielding Spirited unit on the board for the entirety of the game and still manage to win. Of course, there are other ways to do it, but I think those are the two big ones. And then the champion lineup for Endure Spiders has actually been changing a little bit. Previously, 3 Elise, 2 Thresh, 1 Tryndamere was the standard, but we're starting to see players switch more towards Callista. Now, both versions are still being run, and there's a lot of variation among the Endure Spiders decks. We saw Winding God win North America with only 3 spells in his deck, which were Atrocity, Vengeance, and Glimpse Beyond. We see players like Pearson getting top 4 of their respective tournament, not running any Vengeance, no Ruination coming out of the deck. We even saw an Iceborne Legacy Endure Spiders take a top cut spot this weekend. So a lot of variation in this deck. I think you're going to continue to see this one for a while, and it's just a very flexible option. We did see some War Mother's control decks coming out as other options for Shadow Isle Freljord, but for the most part, I'm a bigger fan of the Endure Spiders, and I think it's going to be a more popular deck for you to see over the weekend, so definitely be prepared for this one. I do want to quickly touch on Byrne. We've seen a lot of variation in the champion lineups for these decks. We've seen Just Draven, we've seen Jinx Draven, Draven Darius, no champions, but for the most part the decks all play relatively similar. The discrepancy mostly is going to be in the spell lineup. Do they run 3 Decimate? Do they run Noxian Fervor, Static Shock, things of that nature? Of course, we see them here from Winding God's winning list in North America, but for the most part, playing around the decks and the tools that you bring to beat these decks is all going to have to be the same, and Byrne actually wasn't that popular this weekend. People definitely preferred to experiment with their Noxus decks. We saw a couple of Ashe mid-ranges, some Swain decks, and while Byrne is going to be prevalent, it's not something that you have to hyper-prepare for. This is the first time that we were able to see 3 aggro lineups, and we actually didn't see any across the top cut, so I think you're safe for now to not play into a strategy like that. I thought I could get away without moving the camera for a while, but then I saw the spell list for this deck, and I'm over here now. I also didn't want to have to recap my recap video, but I feel like this is important to contextualize. So I had previously mentioned that I was looking at 22 lineups, 16 of them from the top 8s of Duels of Runeterra 8 from North America and Europe respectively, and then the finalists of a couple of smaller tournaments. I had mentioned that of the 22 decks I was looking at, 10 of them were missing Ionia, and I found out upon further investigation that all 10 of the missing Ionia decks were from Duels of Runeterra 8, and Karma Ezreal was 4 of the 6 remaining Ionia decks from Duels of Runeterra. And it's no secret that Ezreal decks weren't super popular this weekend either. We saw some Ezreal Karma, some Ezreal Draven, and some Ezreal Twisted Fate, although Ezreal Karma was still the most popular. And I think part of the reason for this is, one, we're in a more aggressive meta. It's the opening weekend. You know, people are going to be trying to just aggro things out, and Ezreal doesn't typically deal with that super well, especially the Ionia version. Number two is that they got a lot of new tools, and it's hard to decide which tools are better than the others and actually optimize your Karma Ezreal deck list. And because this is what I would like to call a combo deck, I do legitimately think this is a combo deck, it's very difficult to run an unoptimized combo list and find success with that. So I think that's kind of what downplayed the popularity of Ezreal over this weekend. So where does that leave you going into this weekend? I think we're actually going to continue to see a decline in Ezreal's popularity for one very important reason. And the reason is Vi. Vi was limited to 1 copy per deck in Duels of Runeterra due to a known bugged interaction with multiple copies of the card. While she was legal in the smaller tournaments, obviously I want to weigh Duels of Runeterra results a little bit higher since it was a larger tournament, a little more competitive, it had more good players in it. There's a lot of reasons to want to weigh it more. So Vi has actually been changing the meta a lot since her release. We've seen Vi Bannerman start to pop up on ladder, although I do not think that is going to be a tournament deck since Demacia and PZ have been the most popular regions thus far, and I think combining them into the same deck just for the sake of Vi is something that you're not going to see people doing in a tournament setting. That being said, we didn't see any Heimerdinger last weekend, and a big part of that is because Vi was limited in Duels of Runeterra 8. Heimerdinger is not a deck that we see too often in tournaments, but we see him a lot in winning lineups, and Vi Heimerdinger has come out as the most popular sort of Heimerdinger deck, and I think Vi shores up a lot of weaknesses. So in case you haven't seen a sample deck list, here's one. Vi Heimerdinger is still Ionia across the board from what I have seen. Now, Vi comes down on turn 5. Which is the same turn as Heimerdinger. And there are a lot of situations where you don't want to play your Heimerdinger on 5 because he still feels very threatened. Maybe you don't have the protection in hand. Maybe you feel like you need to deny in that matchup, so you need to wait until turn 6. And Vi gets to come down, requires a lot of commitment to remove. It's either got to be pretty much Thermogenic Beam or Vengeance, and she's almost always going to 2 for 1. And incremental advantages like that, especially on a board state, really help out the Heimerdinger deck in terms of being able to set up and things along those lines. So while we didn't see any Heimer across any of the top cut for the last weekend, I do think it was because of a lack of a Vi, and because the deck is difficult to play. We hadn't seen the deck really pop up. I don't think people were experimenting with Vi as much since they did know that Duels of Runeterra wasn't going to allow multiple copies of her, and Heimerdinger decks generally take a little bit of time to figure out. So with that said, I do think that Heimerdinger Vi is the better Ionia Piltover Zon deck than Karma Ezreal. If that's the route you want to go, of course it is up to you. Personal preference and playstyle play a big role in tournament success, so you have to pick the deck that's right for you, but be aware that I do think this will be the most popular Ionia Piltover and Zon deck, and potentially the most popular Ionia deck. Now that being said, Vi Lee Sin is another popular Ionia Piltover deck that we've seen that was unable to be played last weekend. We did see one top one of the smaller tournaments, I believe it was the finals of the subreddit tournament. We did see one Vi Lee Sin. There was even a Vi Lee Sin in Duels of Runeterra 8 running only 1 copy of Vi, which should just speak to the strength of the deck even with a handicap. So I think we're going to see an uptick in that as well. And of course, Karina control is what comes to mind for me when I think of Vi decks. We saw a little bit of it last weekend, but that is another deck that just heavily benefits from Vi. I cannot overstate Vi's tournament impact and how much you need to consider this card in your lineup as well as in your opponent's lineups when building your decks. So one last thing I wanted to wrap up on here in terms of deck lists is Sea Monsters. This was a deck that we saw be pretty popular as far as Bilgewater decks go on the ladder in the weekend leading up to this tournament. So we've sort of seen Maokai become a little more streamlined since then. People are really going a little more all in on that strategy. We're seeing less of this like try to pray for late game, get down my big guys, Nautilus is really cool anti-Maokai card type stuff. And we could see it come back as an answer to the Maokai decks, but for the most part, I think we are going to continue to see experimentation with Maokai, at least coming into this weekend, and Sea Monsters might make their comeback down the line, but I think this deck is going to remain wildly unpopular for this coming weekend, now that there are more interesting things to do with the Bilgewater region, and some more consistent things to do with the Bilgewater region in a tournament lineup. In the weeks leading up to Rising Tides, your standard tournament lineup hadn't changed that much. It was generally Mono Demacia Bannerman, Karma Ezreal or Karma Heimerdinger, and Indoor Spiders with Noxus getting left behind. And then this is what a standard lineup would look like after last weekend. Mind you, take this with a massive grain of salt since we have an extremely small sample size. We've only had one weekend of tournaments so far. It was grassroots tournaments. This is going to change once the esports scene like really takes off. But this is, if you're sitting down thinking, what are my opponents going to be running, especially if they've been net decking tournament results, this is generally what you should be coming in prepared for. Mono Demacia Bannerman was the most popular Demacia deck, but at the same time, MF Bannerman or MF Scouts was the most popular Bilgewater deck. Then we have PNZ Noxus Byrne was the most popular deck. However, that was followed very closely behind by Ezreal, but there was such a wide array of Ezreals that I couldn't really include that. And then on the bottom, once again, Shadow Isle Freljord staying a dominant regional composition, and this was mostly Indoor Spiders. There were a few Warm Weathers, but a standard lineup going into this weekend if you're thinking, what are my opponents going to be running based on previous tournament results? What deck should I be preparing for? The answer is MF Bannerman, PNZ Noxus Byrne, and Indoor Spiders. So I hope that helps. I appreciate all of you taking the time to watch this video, and good luck in any tournaments you have this weekend. As I said, the online league series will be running. I have a link to the Discord down below. That's going to be Saturday at 5 p.m. EST. There's a League of Legends, or a Legends of Runeterra rather, subreddit tournament going on that you can check out, find out more about on the subreddit since I can't link their Discord. And of course, if you are just looking for anything else, go ahead and check out Battlefy, Challenge, or Smash.gg. Just search up Legends of Runeterra, see if you can find a small tournament. And yeah, I look forward to seeing you guys this weekend. Good luck.